for the safety of her mind and body.
Lord, hear our prayers.
I've missed you awfully, Olivia.
Lord, hear our prayers.
You don't remember me, do you?
Do you fancy seeing the new Exorcist Believer movie? We don't want to bother with all that prestige or production value. Then you may want to check out The Exorcists, directed and written by Jose Pringle, and it's a movie from the Asylum. But wait, don't turn this video off just yet, because this one was actually a better than average Asylum movie, I would say. What is the plot? Well, let's discuss. So, this one focuses on a team of exorcists that are gathered to perform an exorcism of this young 14-year-old girl. The idea being that they want to have a continuous kind of like line of prayer, because this particular kind of girl is, you know, she's young and she has a powerful demon that seems to be possessing her. So we have a team of 3 exorcists, one of which played by Doug Bradley from Hellraiser fame. And they are there along with a doctor, this kind of psychologist, as a kind of team of 4 to try and rid this girl of this demon. However, there seems to be a surreptitious motive for maybe getting these kind of group of people together. At the same time, we have a group of teenagers breaking into a kind of a mausoleum nearby to do a kind of spirit board and contact the dead, which kind of folds into our story at large. What will happen? You will have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss what I think works in this movie. So a couple of recognisable names here, as I've mentioned. You've got Doug Bradley here, who plays one of our main characters, arguably the male lead, which is one of these kind of exorcists. You've also got Denise Duff, who is you recognise if you're a kind of a horror movie fan, particularly of the kind of the full moon movies. And Michelle Bauer's actually credited, although I think she's just doing a voice of this kind of demon. So you've got a few recognisable names here. What works in this film? I think this movie plays a little different to a lot of movies that come out of the Asylum. I suspect Prendes, our director here, had a little bit more control maybe, because it seems to be a more sober movie in some ways. It does fall down in one area which I'll discuss, but I've got to say, and again you have to bear in mind these Asylum movies are very, very low budget. You know, I like the kind of this sober and thoughtful kind of way our kind of cast are put together. This is kind of like a somewhat believable team of characters. We have 3 exorcists, 2 Catholic priests, one of which is played by Doug Bradley, and we get a kind of a female kind of priest as well, though she's not Catholic. She's I forgot what she said she was, but yeah. So we have these kind of team of religious, and there's also the 4th member is this kind of doctor. And I've got to say, this team of central characters, they're all played pretty well. The kind of the Latino younger kind of priest is a little bit underdeveloped, but the rest of them, the other 3 kind of characters, I've got to say, I thought the acting was solid, particularly from Doug Bradley, who really lends, I think, some gravitas to the kind of the role. At least I would say for the majority of the film, giving a kind of mature and sort of like measured performance for this kind of priest, which doesn't seem too schlocky or too B-movie-ish like that. You'll get a lot from these kind of like, you know, actors who kind of primarily do these kind of low-budget Asylum films. You know, Bradley's performance, I think, sets the tone here for the rest of the actors to kind of follow suit. And like I've said, we spend a lot of time with these 4 characters, and none of them are bad. Like I said, there's one guy who I feel you get a little less kind of developed, but he still isn't bad. And then even Denise Duff, who plays this kind of this nun, who we'll see. At least initially, I think again her performance is okay as well. And the kind of the pace of the movie is a little slower, but I think it works because we have these like older kind of priests, and they're obviously, it's not like playing like an action movie, it's a more considered pace, and I thought that was quite good. And I actually kind of quite liked some of the kind of the dialogue sequences in this movie. For example, we have Doug Bradley's priest, who is kind of explaining to this doctor, who is obviously comes from a more scientific background, about how kind of like exorcisms work, and she's like, well, I don't understand, how this kind of works. And Doug Bradley's character, he basically kind of explains like an exorcism is like a boxing match, and you're wearing down your opponent with kind of prayer. It's not something that sort of happens instantly. It's kind of like, it takes time, and you have to kind of like, work at it, and eventually you'll kind of like, you'll kind of get the defenses down and things like that. Which I just thought was a really kind of good way of putting it. And again, this isn't an Asylum movie. I think, man, they don't normally have like good dialogue like this. I thought this was pretty good. So there's that. So it has this kind of a little bit more of a mature kind of tone to it, and a kind of a little bit more of a considered and thoughtful kind of script, and the kind of the way these kind of characters are put together. So that to me was the absolute kind of highlight of the movie. Now there is a kind of a twist in this movie, which I have mixed feelings about, if I'm honest. I don't think it completely works, but I thought there was an interesting idea at least that was partially successful. I'm not going to say what happens, but there was, so there was a little bit of a kind of a left turn within this movie that I thought had some interesting ideas, even though I don't think it was fully successful in implementing them. So that was kind of interesting. There is some fairly good kind of makeup, and again we get to realise this is a lower budget movie. But again, I like this kind of the makeup, these kind of like these possessed. I mean, it's nothing you haven't really seen before. It does follow that kind of that tried and tested formula in regards to the kind of like the bruising and the kind of like the fatigue on people's faces, or the whited out eyes. But it wasn't a bad effort in regards to, makeup. I've seen plenty of low budget kind of zombie films and possession films where the makeup has been pretty terrible. This isn't the case, and I thought that was okay. So that was pretty good. And there are some, even though I personally feel this was a detriment to the film. The movie interjects these kind of like more typical teen jumpy kind of like jump scare sequences, with these kind of this B plot with this kind of group of teenagers that are going into this kind of mausoleum. So there's that. So you have a little bit of variety, I suppose, but I'm going to come back on to that. So there you go. So it's an interesting and somewhat kind of mature film for the Asylum. It's not going to, I think, create any kind of like huge fans of kind of exorcism movies if you're not already one, but I think it's certainly better than you'd probably expect from an Asylum movie. What doesn't work for me, the biggest thing for me, is this storyline with these kind of teenagers. It really feels tacked on, and we spend a lot of time with them for people who are clearly kind of red shirts. It almost feels like, I have to say, that these are like reshoots that were done kind of later on to kind of give it this kind of more of a jump scary kind of modern sort of style, kind of slashery type of aesthetic. Although these two storylines do dovetail towards the end, but they just felt so like different films, to be honest with you, because it doesn't have that subtlety that the kind of the actual possession story, the A storyline, actually does. It's very kind of silly, typical kind of teens in kind of like breaking into somewhere. The acting is not as strong, things like that. So that which is probably about a third of the story, is weaker. I have to be honest as well, even in our kind of our A storyline, the climax to me, I didn't think worked particularly well. Like I was saying, it has this kind of twist. I think it ended up being a little bit too schlocky, and Denise Duff's character, I think, ends up being a little bit of a bit of a schlock fest at the end of it. Although I kind of liked her performance towards the kind of the beginning of the movie. At the end, it's a little bit more kind of hammy and silly, to be honest with you. I think really this is where the movie kind of switches its focus on characters, and that's to me where it starts to lose me a little bit. I think the movie also could have been a little harder in regards to its kind of visceralness. I mean, they deliberately, it's almost aiming for like a PG-13 rating with like no swearing and kind of nothing too gross or kind of violent. So it really does feel like somewhat kind of handicapped because this movie is clearly trying to get a lower age rating, or at least that's how it kind of comes across. I mean, you know, we've seen plenty of possession movies where, you know, the possessed person will be somewhat kind of, you know, foul-mouthed, shall we say, or gross, or kind of like, you know, perform kind of like horrific acts. There's nothing really like that in this film. It's all somewhat a bit more passive and a bit tame, to be honest. And I think it would have benefited had this movie kind of lent into that a bit more and be a little bit more kind of hardcore, because the movie has a maturity about it in its kind of dialogue and its performances, at least through some of the characters. You know, so it's a shame really that it didn't sort of capitalise to make it a mature film overall. But obviously it still has this teen element in it, which it feels like it was mandated to me. I don't know if that's the case, but it's like, had this really just been about RA storyline, I think it would have been better, if we're being completely honest. And it's as I say, there's a little bit of kind of VFX, not the makeup as such, but when we get the kind of like the computer generated kind of veins that are going through people's face and, you know, manipulations and stuff. Again, it looks cheap. It was unnecessary. You know, and again, it just kind of betrays what would have been a little bit more of an elevated kind of Asylum movie to, you know, ends up being a little silly and schlocky at times. But, you know, this is an Asylum movie that I would say is a cut above a lot of what it puts out, and certainly a more of a mature and thoughtful movie, at least in some aspects. And as such, I will give this one a slightly above average mark, because I actually think there's some stuff here that is worth watching. So I'll give this one a 6 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think? Please do leave me a comment and I'll look forward to you next time.